They came down through a clean autumn sky, and the first thing I understood about them was that they were not in a hurry. I had spent 41 years on the deck of the Long Watch, and most of that time I had spent waiting for something that never came. You learn the sky when you keep a ship in it. You learn the way the light lies down on the cloud tops in the afternoon, the way the high air goes thin and violet before a front, the way a contrail from one of the courier boats will hang for an hour and then forget itself. I knew our sky the way a farmer knows a field he has walked since he was a boy. So when the thing that would become the ocean reclaim first showed on the deep arrays as a smudge past the orbit of the moon, I did not need the watch officer to tell me it was wrong. I felt it the way you feel a stranger's step on your own stair. Contact holding beyond the girdle, Solène said. She was my sensor lead, a narrow woman with a voice that never rose, and she had been with me long enough that I could read her hands before her mouth. Her hands were still. That told me more than the words. Mass consistent with a fleet, formation loose. They are not trying to hide. No, I said, they are not. I stood and went to the long window at the forward edge of the command deck. Below us the ninefold city lay under a haze of morning, terrace on terrace of pale towers stepping down toward the estuary, the old river threading between them the way it had threaded between the reed huts of people 40,000 years dead. From up here you could hold the whole of it in one glance and still not take it in, the ring roads glowing faintly even in daylight, the great sunlit spans, the lift columns rising into the cloud where the orbital works began. 11 million people down there, going about a Tuesday. And above them my ship, and above my ship the standing fleet, and above the fleet the girdle, and past all of it the smudge that did not belong. Do we know them? I asked. We know of them, said a new voice, and I turned. The archivist had come up from the lower decks without being called, which archivists were permitted to do and almost never did. Her name was Chara, and she was old, older than me, which is saying something, with the flat, unhurried gaze of a woman who has spent her life reading things that other people burned. She carried a case under one arm, a plain gray case with a lock that was not electronic, and she set it on the chart table with a care that made me look at it twice. You've seen this before, I said. It was not a question. My whole service has been this, she said, and my teachers before mine and hers. She did not open the case. Captain, may I ask you something, and will you answer plainly? I only answer one way. Do you know why the Long Watch is named the Long Watch? I did know, in the way you know the words of a song you never chose to learn. Every ship of the wall carried a name out of the founding, and the founding was a set of old grief we taught to children so they would not have to feel it themselves. But I understood that she was not asking whether I knew the fact. She was asking whether I felt it. And I found, with the smudge past the girdle growing hour by hour, that I did. Tell me anyway, I said. Tell me the way you'd tell it to someone who has to decide something today. She put her hand flat on the gray case. 40,000 years ago, she said. They came the first time. Not these ships, these are grandchildren of those ships, or great-grandchildren. They build slowly and they change slowly, which you will find matters. But they're people. They came the first time and they found us in the reed years, in the first cities of mud, when we had just learned to write down how much grain a man owed his neighbor. And they did to us what a surveyor does to a field he intends to buy. They looked at us. They drew us, she said. I waited. Their scholar caste are called the limnari, she said. It is an old word in their tongue, and it means, near enough, the ones who render. When the Ashan take an interest in a world, the limnari go down and they render it. They make a true depiction of it, they say, a rendering that captures the whole nature of a place in the fewest necessary lines. It is a great art among them and a great power. To be rendered by the limnari is to be known, finally and forever, in your essence. That is how they think of it. She paused. They rendered Earth in 3 lines, Captain. 3 lines. 3. Her mouth did something that was not a smile. We have the rendering. It is in this case 3 strokes and a mark of dismissal, a small glyph they use for holdings not worth the collecting yet. It means, near as we can translate it, draw again later. They filed us, a minor form on a wet world of no present use to be looked in on when convenient, and they went away. She lifted her hand off the case at last. That is why the ship is called the Long Watch, and why there is a fleet over your head, and why I have spent my life keeping a gray box safe. We are the watch that was set the day we learned we had been drawn small and left for later. And later, Captain, has arrived. I looked out the window again. The smudge had resolved on the near arrays now into what it was. Not a smudge, but a great, patient descent of ships, dark and unhurried, coming down toward us the way a hand comes down toward a thing it has already decided it owns. They think they are collecting a holding, I said. They think they are looking in on a field, said Achara, to see whether it is finally worth drawing again. I have been asked since by people who were not there whether I was afraid. It is a fair question, and I will answer it fairly. I was not afraid the way a man is afraid of a knife. I was afraid the way you are afraid the morning of a thing you have prepared your whole life for and now cannot be sure you prepared enough. There is a particular loneliness in that. You have done the work. The work is behind you and cannot be redone. All that is left is to find out. So Len, I said, wake the fleet, not to fire, to be seen. I want the whole standing fleet lit and holding, and I want the girdle to turn its faces toward them, and I want the lift columns bright. Do not raise a single gun. She looked at me. Sir, not one. Not one, I said. We are not going to threaten them. A threat is a thing you make when you are not sure of yourself. We are going to let them look at us. We have spent 40,000 years becoming a thing that answers a threat all by itself. Let it answer. They descended for the better part of a day, and I let them, and I used the day. I have found that the difference between men who keep their heads and men who lose them is almost always preparation, and the difference between preparation that holds and preparation that shatters is almost always whether it was done in fear or done in patience. Fearful preparation is brittle. It plans for the disaster it dreads and nothing else. Patient preparation is supple, because it was built by people who did not know exactly what was coming, and so built for the shape of many things. Everything about the way Earth met the ocean that day had been built in patience, across 400 centuries, by people none of whom would live to see the thing they were building against. That is a strange kind of faith, and I do not fully understand it even now. But I stood inside it that day like a man standing inside a cathedral, raised by hands long turned to dust, and I felt held. The standing fleet came awake around me, line ships rising from their berths in the high cities, from the lunar keels, from the deep quiet places past the girdle where we kept the ships we did not talk about. They did not scramble. There was no alarm run to them, no ragged sprint. They rose the way a tide rises, each in its ordered place, and by mid-afternoon there was a wall of them across the near sky, thousands of hulls catching the falling sun, and every one of them silent, every gun cold, every face turned outward toward the descending ocean with the flat attention of a crowd that has stopped talking to watch a man walk out onto a high ledge. They've slowed, Solène reported some hours in. The reclaim, they've stopped descending. Good, I said, they've seen the fleet. They're resurveying, sir. She frowned at her board. That's the read. Their instruments are lit, all of them there. They're doing it again. They're rendering us, right now. I understood then what was happening aboard those dark ships, and I will tell you it was one of the few moments in my life when I felt something close to pity for a thing that had come to take my world, because I knew what they were finding. They had come with a 40,000-year-old survey, 3 lines and a mark that said draw again later. And they had come to look in on the field and confirm the old rendering and collect. And instead they had begun, without meaning to draw us again, and the drawing would not close. Let me tell you what the limnary found, because I have since read their own account of it, recovered later, and it is a more terrible thing in their words than in mine. They found a fleet that their instruments could not resolve into a number, because our formations were not built to be counted from outside. A discipline 40,000 years old, 1,000 small refusals to be surveyed, until the refusing itself had become a kind of architecture. They found a planet whose skin returned no simple reading, because we had learned slowly, patiently, across the long centuries, that a world which can be read at a glance is a world that can be drawn small, and so we had made ourselves unreadable, not hidden, never hidden but deep, layered, more than any single glance could hold. They found orbital works that ran further out than their arrays could follow and further down than their probes dared go. They found a sky full of ships that did not move like frightened ships or like proud ships but like patient ships. And patience, to a people who had built their whole power on the art of knowing a thing quickly and completely, is the most frightening quality in the universe. Because you cannot render patience in 3 lines. You cannot render it at all. It has no edge to draw. They ran their instruments until the instruments returned only the thing the limnary most feared to report to their masters, which was, "This world cannot be rendered," and I am told there is no worse sentence in their tongue. To a people whose whole claim to a world rests on having drawn it truly, a world that cannot be drawn is a world that cannot be claimed. And worse, a world that has looked back at the surveyor and remained unknown is a world that may itself know you. I put the long watch forward. I did it alone, ahead of the fleet, which is not a thing a careful captain does. But I had decided that the ocean needed one face to speak to and not a wall, because a wall is a thing you fight and a face is a thing you reckon with, and I did not want them to fight. I wanted them to reckon. So I brought my single ship out from the line and let it hang in the empty air between the standing fleet and the stalled reclaim, low enough over the ninefold city that the towers were bright beneath us, and I opened the old channels, the founding channels, the ones we had kept alive for 40,000 years for exactly one call, and I spoke. I will not pretend I made a speech. Achara had told me, on the way up from the archive, that the Ashan despised speeches, that to their ears elaboration was the mark of a small mind trying to seem large, and that the limnary in particular respected only economy, only the fewest necessary lines. So I gave them the fewest necessary lines. "This is the world you filed," I said. "We kept the file, come and read it back." There was a long silence, the kind of silence that is wait, and then the dark ships answered, not with words at first but with a shape, a single vessel detaching from the reclaim and coming forward to hang opposite my ship across a gulf of clean air, close enough that I could see the working of it, the slow articulated plates of a hull built by a people who did everything slowly, the great forward aperture where, I understood, their renderers stood and looked out and drew the worlds they meant to own. And from that aperture a voice reached me across the founding channels, and it was old and dry and unhurried, and it said, in a translation that came a half-beat behind the sound, "You speak the collecting tongue. That is not permitted to a holding." "We are not a holding," I said. "We stopped being a holding a long time ago. You simply weren't here to notice." Every world believes it is more than it is. The voice had no heat in it. That was the thing about them I came to understand. They were not cruel the way a conqueror is cruel. They were cruel the way a ledger is cruel. We have collected worlds that believed they were empires. We have rendered civilizations that thought themselves eternal, and the rendering outlived them, and now the rendering is all that remains, and it is only 4 lines. You are a wet minor form on a small world. We drew you once. We have returned to draw you again and collect you, if you are worth the collecting. This is the order of things. It has been the order of things since before your kind made fire. I had been warned he would say something like this. Achara had told me, they will offer you the order of things. They believe in it the way you believe in the ground. Do not argue with it. Show them the ground has moved. "What is your name?" I asked. The pause was longer this time. I don't think anyone had asked in a while. "I am the reclaimer of this line," the voice said. "I hold the renderings of 900 worlds. I am Uthasar of the Limnary of the Ashan, and I have come 40,000 of your years to look in on a field." "Then look, Uthasar," I said. "You've been looking all afternoon. Tell me what you've drawn." I heard something then that I have thought about many times since. It was not an answer. It was a sound, a low sound from the alien across the gulf, a sound the translation did not touch, and Achara, standing at my shoulder, went very still, and when I glanced at her, her face had changed. "That's the sound," she said quietly, "that they make when a rendering will not close." She had spent her life reading these people. I trusted her the way you trust the one man in the boat who has been to sea. "Captain, he can't draw us. He's been trying since noon and he can't make the lines meet." That sound is what it costs him to admit it. To himself first. He hasn't admitted it to you yet. "Then let's help him," I said, and I turned to the deck. "Bring us about, show him the works." We turned the long watch slowly. Everything we did that day, we did slowly, deliberately, at the Austrians' own patient tempo, because I had decided we would meet them in their own grammar. And we brought the great forward window around so that it framed the ninefold city and the estuary and the long coast beyond, and past that the curve of the world going blue with distance. And I let Uthasar look through my eyes at what 40,000 years had made of the 3 lines he had drawn. I told him what he was seeing. I did it plainly, without pride, the way you'd point out landmarks to a man who had been away a long time. "That river," I said. "When your people came the first time, there were reed huts along it and men who could count to 100 if you gave them time. Now there are 11 million people in the city on its banks, and every one of them can read and write and reckon and remember. That's the first thing we built with the years you gave us. Not the towers, the remembering. We taught every child what you did, that a people came and looked at us, and decided we were 3 lines and not worth the trouble and went away. We didn't teach them to hate you. Hate is a small thing and it burns out. We taught them to be ready. 40,000 years of children, Uthasar, each one raised knowing that somewhere out in the dark there was a people who had drawn us small and might come back to collect, and each one adding 1 course of stone to a wall none of them would live to see finished. That's the city you're looking at. That's the fleet over your head. It isn't a weapon. It's a memory that learned to build." The dark ship hung across the gulf and said nothing, and I went on. "You built your power on knowing things quickly," I said. "On the fewest necessary lines. It's a great art, I mean that. But it has a flaw, and you've found the flaw today, and I think you found it hours ago and have been trying not to. The flaw is that a thing drawn quickly can only be drawn small. To draw a world in 3 lines you have to decide before you even look that it can be held in 3 lines. And once you've decided that, you can never see the thing that grows past your 3 lines, because your whole art depends on not seeing it. You looked at us 40,000 years ago and you drew what you were able to draw, and then you filed the drawing and called it us, and you went away certain. And we spent every year since becoming the thing your drawing couldn't hold. We didn't do it to spite you. We barely thought of you most centuries. We did it because a people who has been drawn small once will do anything, across any span of time, to never be drawn small again. That is the strongest force I know of. It built everything you are looking at. And it cannot be rendered, Uthasar, because it isn't a shape. It's a refusal." I heard the sound again, the low sound of a rendering that would not close. And this time, the translation caught a fragment at the edge of it, 3 words that I have kept with me since. "Drew it wrong." "Yes," I said gently, because there was no reason to be otherwise. "You drew it wrong, that's all this is. You made a small mistake 40,000 years ago, a reasonable mistake, an understandable mistake. You looked at a wet minor form and drew what was there. But you filed it as finished. And nothing is finished, reclaimer. That's the only law your art forgot. Nothing that's alive is ever finished being drawn." Then I told Solène to bring up the case. I want to be careful here, because this is the part that people ask me about most, and it is the part I understand least how to explain to someone who was not raised inside the Long Watch's grief. When Achara brought the gray case to the forward window and opened it, the lock was a mechanical thing, a set of tumblers that had been turned by the hands of 9 archivists before her, and the sound of it opening was very loud in that quiet deck, and inside, on a bed of dark cloth, was the rendering. It did not look like much. That is the terrible power of it. It was a thin sheet of some Ostian material that had not aged in 40,000 years, and on it were 3 strokes of a dark medium, confident and economical and cruel in their brevity, and beside them a small glyph, and that was all. 3 lines and a mark. That was the whole of what a great and ancient people had seen when they looked at everything we were and everything we would become. A wet minor form, of no present use. Draw again later. We had kept it for 40,000 years. Do you understand what that means? Through ice and famine and the fall of every early thing, through the long dark centuries when we forgot how to read our own founding and had to learn it again from the stones, through wars that should have burned every record we ever made, through all of it, one people in one unbroken line had kept a gray box safe and passed it down, hand to hand, archivist to archivist, so that on a day none of them would live to see, someone could open it and hand it back. That is a discipline I do not have words for. Achara had it. Her whole line had it. They kept the wound so that the rest of us would not have to carry it, and they kept it not as a grievance but as a receipt, and the difference is everything. This is yours, I said to Uthasar, and I had Achara hold the rendering up to the window so that the aperture of the dark ship could see it across the gulf. This is the drawing your people made of us the first time. We've kept it. We keep everything, reclaimer. That's another thing you couldn't have known, another thing that can't be rendered from outside. We are a people who keeps. You filed us and forgot us. We filed you and remembered. For 40,000 years we have known your name, or the shape of your name, and the mark of your dismissal, and the exact number of lines you thought we were worth. And we have measured every year of our becoming against those 3 lines. Every tower down there is an argument with your drawing. Every ship over your head is a sentence in a very long reply. The dark ship was utterly still. I have never in my life felt a silence like the one that came off it. I am going to give it back to you, I said. That is all I am going to do. I'm not going to fire on you. I'm not going to hold you here. I'm not going to make you kneel or take your ships or teach you a lesson. A lesson is a small thing, and you would not learn it from me anyway. You'll only learn it from the drawing. I am going to hand you your own rendering of us, 40,000 years old, and I am going to let you go home carrying it, and you are going to look at it, all the way home, for however long the journey takes, and you are going to see 3 lines and a mark that says draw again later. And behind the 3 lines you are going to see what we became. And that will be the whole of your punishment, Uthasar, and it will be worse than anything I could do to your fleet, because I could only destroy you and the drawing will haunt you. Take it back. You dropped it here 40,000 years ago. We picked it up. We're returning it. I had the launch bring it across. A single small craft, unarmed, carrying the gray case, crossing the gulf of clean air between my ship and theirs while the whole standing fleet watched and did not raise a gun. It was the longest few minutes of my life. There was every chance they would take it as an insult and open fire, and if they had, I do not know that even the fleet could have made it clean. The Ostian are not weak, whatever else they are, and a cornered people who has just learned it drew the world wrong is not a safe people. But I had gambled, we had all gambled, 40,000 years of us, that a people who built their whole soul on rendering the truth of a thing would not be able to look away from a true thing once it was put in their hands. That the limnary of all beings in the universe would be the ones who could not refuse a correct drawing, even when the drawing was of their own mistake. The launch reached the dark ship. The aperture opened wider. Something reached out and took the case. I could not see clearly what. The translation gives me no good word for their hands, and drew it inside, and the aperture closed. And then for a long time nothing. Achara stood beside me at the window, and I saw that her eyes were wet, and I understood that for her this was not a diplomatic outcome or a military one. This was the end of a thing her family had carried for longer than any family should carry anything. She had opened the box. She had handed back the wound. Whatever her line had been for, it had been for this, and now it was done, and I think a person can be undone by the end of a long duty almost as much as by its weight. You did it, I said to her quietly so the deck would not hear. All of you, every one of you back to the first. You did it. We only kept it, she said. You gave it back. No, I said. Anyone could have given it back. Keeping it was the hard part. Keeping a wound for 40,000 years without letting it turn to poison, teaching your children the readiness without teaching them the hate. That's the thing I don't understand and never will. That's the miracle. I just carried the box the last little way. The dark ship spoke. Uthasar's voice came across the founding channels one final time, and it was changed. I do not mean it was broken, or afraid, or humbled in any way I could point to. The Ashen do not break the way we break, and I would not insult him by claiming he did. But something in it had gone very quiet, the way a great house goes quiet when the man who built it has finally understood something about the way he built it. And he said, "We render so that the truth of a thing will outlive the thing. That is our art and our law. In 900 worlds I have never held a rendering that was returned to me by the thing I rendered." A pause. "You have handed me a true drawing, 3 lines and a mark. It is a true drawing of what you were." Another pause longer, and I understood he was choosing the fewest necessary words, and that this cost him more than any speech would have cost a man. "It is a false drawing of what you are." Both are true at once. I do not have an art for that. My people do not have an art for that. The dry voice went drier still. "You have given me a thing I cannot file. I will carry it home. I will look at it, as you said. I do not think I will stop looking at it. You have done to me what you say we did to you. You have drawn me in a way I cannot escape. But you have drawn me correctly, and that is the one cruelty my people cannot answer, because it is the one thing we taught the galaxy to respect." "Go home, reclaimer," I said. "Draw your own worlds a little slower from now on. That's all we ask." "We ask nothing of you in return," he said, "because you have taken nothing and left us nothing to bargain with. That, too, I do not have an art for." And then, almost to himself, in a register the translation nearly missed, 40,000 years, and they kept it. They kept the drawing. The sound he made then was not the sound of a rendering failing to close. It was something else. I have wondered since whether it was the sound of a rendering finally closing of a man, if I can call him a man, seeing a thing whole for the first time and knowing it was too late to have seen it sooner. "We will not return." "I know," I said. "You've been drawn now too. You can't unsee it either." The reclaim rose. It took them the rest of that day to go, and we let them, and we kept the whole standing fleet-lit and holding and silent until the last of the dark ships had climbed past the girdle and dwindled and was gone, out past the moon, out into the long dark where they would spend a journey of 40,000 years looking at a drawing of their own mistake. We did not cheer. I had given the order that there would be no cheering, and I did not need to enforce it. Nobody wanted to. It was not that kind of day. It was the kind of day that is quiet at the end because the thing that finished was too old and too large to celebrate. You do not cheer when a wall your ancestors built holds against the flood. You put your hand on the stone, and you are quiet, and you think about the hands. I stood at the window a long time after they were gone. Below us the ninefold city had never stopped 11 million people, going about a Tuesday, most of them never knowing how close the sky had come. And that was right, that was the whole point, that was what all of it had been for. Not glory, never glory. Just the ordinary evening, the lift columns bright against the dusk, the river going about its old business between the towers, a city full of people who could read and write and reckon and remember, living the plain lives that 40,000 years of readiness had bought them. Solène came and stood beside me. "Will they really not come back, sir?" she asked. "Any of them ever?" I thought about it honestly, because she deserved an honest answer, and because it was a question worth the honesty. "I don't know," I said. "Maybe someone will someday who never saw the drawing. Maybe the memory will thin on their end the way memories do, but I'll tell you what I do know." I nodded down at the city, at the river, at the long, patient wall of ships turning gold in the last light. "We'll still be keeping. That's the thing they never understood about us, the thing that can't be drawn. They rendered us in 3 lines and thought they were finished, because to them a thing you've drawn is a thing you're done with. But we're never done. We kept a gray box safe for 40,000 years to hand a stranger his own drawing back. Whoever comes next in 1,000 years or 100,000, they'll find a people who's still keeping, still remembering, still building the wall none of us will live to see finished. I found that I was not tired, though I should have been. I found that I felt held still inside the long faith of all those dead hands. Let them come back and draw us again. We'll have grown past whatever they draw. We always do. It's the one thing we're for. She was quiet a moment. What do we do with the founding channels now, sir? She asked. The old ones. We've kept them open 40,000 years for that one call, and the call came. I looked at the darkening sky, where the ocean had gone. We keep them open, I said. We keep everything open. We keep the watch. That's what the ship is named for. I put my hand on the cold sill of the window the way you'd put your hand on stone. The drawing went home tonight, Solène, but the keeping doesn't end because one wound got handed back. The keeping is the thing itself. It's not the box. It was never the box. I watched the first stars come out over the ninefold city, over 11 million ordinary evenings, over a river that had run past reed huts and now ran past towers and would run past whatever we became next. It's the being ready. It's the remembering without the hate. It's teaching the children the wall and not the fear. We'll do it for the next 40,000 years the same as we did the last. And if anyone ever comes down out of that sky again, thinking, they can draw us in 3 lines and file us and go home. I did not finish it. I did not need to. The fleet finished it for me, hanging silent and golden and patient across the whole of the evening sky. 40,000 years of remembering turned to iron and held over a city that would sleep well that night and never know why. We kept the watch. We always had. We always would. That is the whole of it. That is what happened the day the ocean came back to collect a holding and found, instead, a people who had kept the receipt.